Welcome to 3ETV. I'm Chuck Callahan and I'm here with Allie, and we're going to continue our conversation about her study abroad service learning trip to Brazil and up the Amazon. And we want to talk a little bit about the intercultural construct of empathy, which means basically the ability to interpret intercultural experiences from the perspectives of more than one worldview and demonstrate the ability to be supportive and to have empathy and recognize the feelings of another culture. So, Allie, did you run into any opportunity to express intercultural empathy when you were on your trip?
Yes, I had my fair share of that, but the first example that I want to bring up is just when we landed within the village, and we had our first walk through, we noticed that there was what we would call trash on the floor, or on the ground, and it would just be in little bunches. And our first response was, "This is a conservation course. Like, this is, people of the Amazon. Like, they're the Kayabo. Like, why is there trash on the floor?"
What did the trash look like?
It was just sometimes it was a piece of fabric. Sometimes it was like a what's it called, like a potato sack, that type of material would just be thrown, or just like little wrappers of little things. It was less wrappers than
We're
anything
talking
else,
about Pepsi cans and beer bottles.
No,
Okay.
not that type. But you could tell it was discarded material that was no longer used. It was, in most cases, used for some kind of packaging. But they would just be on the floor. And so our first question was, what's going on? And you would have, by every little house, you would see these little kind of bundles of what we call trash. And initially that seemed kind of strange, but a few of the students responded to that, and we later learned in
So
one
how
of
did
the
they
lectures.
respond to that difference?
I immediately was like, whoa, I can't make a judgment on this because it's not like they have a trash pickup program. And so that was one thing that I could have gotten upset over, could have taken the wrong way, but I didn't, and I completely just suspended judgment.
We didn't understand, so we had to bring it up to the professors. Like, why is there trash? And the first response is, that's not trash. It's placed there for a very deliberate intent, and it's placed there because it needs to be there for a certain reason. And so it's one of those things where we did judge. We went into it thinking confused, right? Not in a bad way, but it's just, why is there trash on the floor? Because it's supposed to be it's supposed to be kept somewhere. And even more so when we're talking about conservation and sustainability. But we quickly shifted that mindset, and some of the students reflected upon that. But the same thing was true when we went into the garden, into the community garden, and we noticed that it just seemed like brushes and everything was just scattered in terms of the everything that was cultivated there. And again, it was the same thing. We thought that it was unorganized, but it was very organized and very deliberate. Each thing was planted there for a specific reason. And
Weeds was actually a carefully cultivated place because everything was spread out in such a way to maximize growth. And each of the woman's garden is different because the knowledge of how to cultivate and use the land is passed from mother to daughter. So everyone has a very unique and specialized relationship to their garden and to the environment because they each have their own way of doing it.
their form of organizing things is different than ours. And even
They
though
didn't plant things in a row?
No. No, and of course we think that that's what you're supposed to do because that's all we know. But that's not the case. They had their own logistics for it. We saw how manioc grows, and it can be very toxic. And so for that reason, it has to be planted in a certain way, and different things that is just different than what we're accustomed to. In fact, I had my share of difference. And I had to be empathetic. We were, as part of the festivities, there was it was the best. It was literally dancing all night. So I was in heaven, I thought. I was born for this. So they would have a stage. They built a stage just for the festivities, and they would just play music. It was like as a DJ, so it was not live music, but still. So then it was interesting because we would go up to where the people would be gathered, and we would just be standing there and admiring everything. And then we started noticing that we were among very young people. And these were the unmarried, so the girls and the guys, and they were looking for partners to dance. And by like our age, we were considered old, so we weren't technically supposed to be standing there. We were supposed to be standing with the elders. But in our point of view, none of us were married or had children, so of course we were young. But to them, no, we needed to be with the adults. So that in itself was interesting. But so we ended up realizing that and thought, okay, we don't belong with the young ones, and they were looking for dance partners anyway. So we were like, okay, well, we'll just leave. And we went to where the mothers were kind of waiting there, and the older people, because they're not really even old, and so some of the women took some of us, the girls, students, to dance, and so we were dancing like partners, and I was having a great time, and the music was similar to my Latin music, so I was like, I was having a great time dancing around, and she stopped all of a sudden, and she didn't want to dance anymore. So I thought, did I step on her? I didn't understand what had happened, and of course she's trying to talk to me. I don't understand what she's saying, and she goes to Dr. Zanotti, and Dr. Zanotti comes over and she translates and pretty much says, You're not dancing right. She doesn't like the way you dance. She's not happy with you right now. And I had to realize that I was moving too much. And to them, the women had to dance, and the men were the ones that could move a little bit more. But I had to stop. I was going too much.
So your dancing was embarrassing her.
Yes, my dancing was embarrassing her. Yeah, it was.
And then you had to deal with that. So
yeah, but she wasn't afraid to tell me. So thankfully, because then I was able to reflect and say, oh, okay.
So you were able to change your behavior to fit in with the cultural difference.
Yes, and from that point on, I had to control the way I danced. I couldn't be me. I had to contain myself because I knew that they had different expectations.
Yeah. So how'd you feel when you first heard that you weren't dancing right?
Well, I thought I was doing great. I thought.
Were you angry, hurt? What did you feel?
No, I was just very surprised because initially I just didn't get it, and it did take me a little bit, just standing there, to realize, because I started realizing that all the other girls were dancing different too, and they were dancing, a little more stiff, and that was my cue to change it too, and it wasn't anger, it was just a change.
So you expressed some degree of cultural empathy.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back for our next segment and talk about another construct of intercultural competency.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome back to 3ETV. I'm Chuck Callahan. Ali and I are talking about her trip up the Amazon on a Purdue Service Learning Study Abroad trip. And we want to talk a little bit about her opportunity to encounter a difference relating to verbal to nonverbal communication, which is one of the constructs of intercultural competency. So Ali, what type of experiences did you have dealing with communication on your trip?
Well, I can first talk about my personal experience. I'm bilingual, so living here most of my life in the U.S., I can pretty much say I've never been placed in a situation where I felt uncomfortable because I couldn't speak the language. I could always juggle between English and Spanish, and so that's what's most used here in the United States. And for the first time, I knew I really did experience that frustration. Even being when we were in the city in Brazil, I thought I'd be able to get by with Portuguese quite easily because of my Spanish, but I couldn't. And I think that's the first time that it really hit me hard, where it was, I need to know where the gate is, at the airport, and I would try, but they couldn't understand, and it was frustrating, and it really was. I realized, at my 26 years, it really was the first time that I felt frustrated that I could really experience, because of course I went through this process when I was learning English, but I was a child, and I still remember that, but not as severely as this experience. And so that kind of prompted me and eased me into, the other severity, which was not knowing Kayapo. And that, of course, I knew I was going to have to handle. But the instructors did quite a good job of being able to prep us for that and providing lists of some kind of basic terms. So that was my kind of personal account.
So, were there any perhaps nonverbal type communications that you learned while traveling?
Well, and going back to being among the Kayapo, there were a lot of things that we kind of had to negotiate. So one of the clips is going to talk about one of the girls, how she used body language.
One of the biggest things that I've noticed in terms of body language is a lot of people, when you look at them and smile, they'll, hold on, let me do it for you. They'll go like this. And it's less of the head nod, it's more of the eyebrows. So it's just and they also inhale too, and it's supposed to mean like yes or acknowledging you. I think it means more than yes, but mostly it means yes. And so if you ask a question and they'll move their eyebrows, or you just smile at them and move their eyebrows.
It wasn't so much that she learned, that she picked up, she was able to pick up on the body language that they used, which is also different than what we do or what we use. And I remember at one point, especially when I first got there, I saw the children, and my first instinct was to smile, but I wouldn't receive smiles back.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, they're never going to like me, or what is this? And then towards the end of the trip, it was kind of the same thing. You would smile, and they wouldn't smile back, and I thought that was because, again, there was, I was unpleasant for some reason, but it wasn't that. It's different. But I think the most significant one is I would wave hello to the kids, and I would receive nothing back. So I thought, what is it? But again, they don't recognize that as much, and it's just something that they don't use, or they may use it, but it's not typical. For us, it's a universal form of saying hello. You wave your hand, and that's not the case. And so I know that other students had a frustrating time with that. One student reflects upon that.
One of my greatest worries is like not being able to fit in with the people in Arukre, because there's like not just people from this village, there's like several other villages like who's here for a celebration. So I worry of not being able to speak Kayapo, and like I don't even know how to speak Portuguese, so I would really try to brush up on my language skills, or at least try to read their facial expression better.
The frustration of encountering all this difference and just being curious and wanting to interact and talk and ask questions, and you can't. You have to rely on an interpreter. And so when the interpreter wasn't there, so towards the end we did a lot of trading with them, and they do these beautiful beaded bracelets, like beaded anything. They're just masters at it. And different artistic or artistry products that they produce. And so we were basically all huddled around and wanting to purchase their things, and so we would give them our things, or we would trade. So we would bargain with tents, because they want tents and they want sleeping bags and these things that for them is hard to get, because they have to get into it's just very hard for them. So that was really difficult too, because we're there wanting to negotiate with them, and you had to rely on someone coming over and saying, oh, he says this, and it's just complete translation, and you have to rely on that. That sometimes it's frustrating, especially when you see something so special that you want to ask more about it and you want to know more about it, and you can't. But then again, the instructors were incredible at that, and not only Dr. Zanotti, but also a professor from Brazil, Dr. Diego, and he was there as well and helping us kind of make that transition.
So were there any, real quick, we have 1 minute left here in this segment, were there any things that they did that you didn't understand? Any nonverbals that they would do that you would not understand what they were trying to communicate to you?
There was one thing that it was their form of communicating emotion.
Okay.
And they were receiving a village during the festivities. They were receiving a village who was going to come and celebrate with them as well. And all of a sudden, one of the elder women, just to us, she was screaming.
Okay.
And she wasn't screaming, she was crying. And it was her expressing emotional state because she hadn't seen someone from another village in a really long time. And so we didn't know what that cry was for. We didn't know if it was a call or, and of course everyone was just kind of curious about it until we were notified that she was communicating emotion and pain and kind of sorrow more than anything else. And that happened again later with one of the elder men. And I think he had lost someone special. And during those times, it's very emotional.
Wow, that's really a
experience.
powerful example. So,
Yeah.
well, we'll be back shortly. This wraps up this segment of 3ETV discussing nonverbal and verbal communication.
I am poised under pressure. I led Purdue to a come-from-behind victory in my first start. I am focused on the field and in class. I draw inspiration from the cradle of quarterbacks. I am Rob Henry, and I am a Boilermaker.
Welcome back to 3ETV. I'm Chuck Callahan. I'm here with Allie, and we're continuing our discussion of her study abroad trip up the Amazon and relating it to some of the key constructs of intercultural knowledge and competency. The one we want to talk about now is intercultural curiosity, which basically means you are willing to ask questions about a different culture and difference, and then to seek out those answers to those questions. And some interculturalists consider this perhaps the keystone of intercultural knowledge and competency, because all the other constructs are basically dependent upon a person being curious. So, Allie, talk a little bit about how you found yourself curious about this indigenous people that you were spending your trip with.
Okay. So I think in terms of curiosity, you're right. It really does. Everything else just falls under that. And it was one of those things that, in terms of curiosity, that we knew we were going, like, in terms of the students, decided to take this trip for a very deliberate reason, and that was that we knew we were going to have so much to learn and so much to gain from this. Because it was going to be a very, very different social structure than what we're accustomed to. So I just recall that that build-up emotion that we were all carrying with us throughout the trip before we actually were able to arrive to Auca was just insane. And everyone would reflect that. I would interview them before getting on the jet. And everyone had the biggest smiles, and everyone was just, because they didn't know what to expect, but they knew it was going to be great. And so we had just spent the summer reading about the Kayapo and about their history and about their ideologies and all these things. And so it's like you know them in that sense, and you know how intricate they are and how complex that is compared to what you're used to. But it's that curiosity of just experiencing it, I think, was just huge, and we all felt it in very profound ways. So that's exactly I feel like what we experienced. I know that I went on this trip with a mission of I can't say no to anything, I have to try everything. And I think that was great because I was able to experience what it felt like to swim in with electric eels, and I know what it felt like to climb this mountain at 5 a.m. in the morning, and just like all the other people did as well. We took a hike. We ended up hiking, or we were sleeping in the middle of the Amazon after a hike there, and we fell asleep on banana leaf trees, I think it was, and it was just outside. In the middle of the night, we all wake up because there was a monkey fight above us. Like those things, it was just really profound. But in terms of being in the village, everyone, just the curiosity aspect just carried out through the whole trip. We would do lectures, or the instructors would lecture on different topics every day. So it was just a different activity. And they were very good about, okay, ask the questions that you want. And we always had tons of questions to ask. At one point, we sat there with the master artisan, and we ended up being there for such a long time because there's so many things that we wanted to know. We had that experience with the chief as well. And the thing is, that I think is the most important thing of all, is the Kayapo allowed us to be curious. They were open to answering these questions and interacting with us. Had they not, I think we would have been more reserved. I think so.
So think about perhaps one of the things that just really struck you that was so very, very different and you couldn't figure it out, and you basically had to go to, I guess we call them cultural mentors, who explained to you what was really happening there.
I feel like I've named some, like the really, really extreme ones I think I've named, but just for example, the Brazil nuts, okay? So that they have tons of those out there, right? And just the way they even like get their food is just really interesting. But so they make a profit off of the Brazil nuts, and so they collect them and they are able to sell them and get a profit from them. But just I remember we would grab them and we couldn't figure out how do you open these things, because they're incredibly hard, and how do you do that? And one of the men just got out like a big machete, which is huge, and he had the little nut, and he's just and that's just
He's
like
holding it with his fingers, hitting it with the machete?
Yes, and I thought, what if this could go so wrong, it could be so bad, but it was revealed before us. Just okay, it's so easy, So things like that. We were able to climb an acai tree, and when they said climb it, I don't know if there was going to be rope involved, whatever. But no, they just you use your body and a little piece of textile on our feet. And so one of the women went up with a machete as well, because you have to take that up to on the tree to be able to cut the fruit. And she just climbed up like nothing. And of course, then we were given the opportunity, and we wanted, we had we're gonna do it, but it's just not as easy. It's not as easy as it is for them. Though some of us were able to get up there after all. But I think just putting ourselves in that mindset of, okay, whatever we're going to encounter, let it be, and let's ask questions. And the group was just great about that. And I think it was also inspiring when someone else would ask a question about something very intricate about, their culture, and it was just great to bounce those.
I think the key there is you had cultural mentors with you that could explain things to you. What was happening.
Yeah. Dr. Zanotti's incredibly knowledgeable, and Dr. Diego as well, and the conservation researchers. So yeah, that was huge.
Well, that wraps up our segment here on discussing intercultural curiosity. We'll come back and discuss the final construct of intercultural knowledge and competency here shortly.
I am an American.
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 That's the way most of us put it, just matter of factly.
They're plain words, those four. You could write them on your thumbnail
or sweep them across a bright autumn sky.
But remember, too, that they are more than just words.
They are a way of life.
So whenever you speak them firmly.
Speak them proudly. Speak them gratefully. I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
Hi, I'm Chuck Callahan. Ali and I are continuing our discussion of the service learning study abroad trip that she took to Brazil, and we're going to wrap up looking at intercultural competency and the construct of cultural self-awareness, which is basically you're able to see your own rules and biases in your own cultural awareness and how you use that as a lens to look at dealing with difference. So Ali, what types of things did you encounter on your trip where you were seeing a different culture, but you realized you were interpreting what was going on through your own lens, through your own culture, and had to realize that you were looking at things from your own bias?
I think the kind of that first realization was more of that interaction, and it was mostly the interaction that or lack of interaction that I had with the women. And sometimes the men were a little bit more open about greeting when they would walk by, things like that. But for some reason, the women weren't as open.
It's almost a switch from our society and their society. I would say females tend to be more relationship-oriented.
Yeah, and they seem to be a little bit more friendly. Like they want to approach you, they want to say hello, they want to greet you, type of thing. And in part, maybe it was that I was expecting, and I think it was also just like for me, just the common courtesy. If I walk past someone, I have, and it's not that I have to, but I want to smile. I want to make that connection.
So when they didn't smile back, what did you think?
And when they wouldn't smile back, I thought either they had some judgment. They held some judgment against me, whether it's just those kids that are here visiting, or things like that. But it wasn't necessarily that. It was just, it also took kind of time, because eventually I would get to know some of the women, and so they would begin to not smile, because they never really smiled, but they would say their greeting, and then I felt like, okay, we're okay. But I think it took more time to develop that with the women than it did with the men. So that was something that I kind of had to realize really quick, because you're out in the village, you're constantly walking past these people, it's very open, so you're constantly experiencing that. But some of the students bring this up, and I think it was like the most severe one, where it was just the concept of time. You don't realize how accustomed we are to relying on looking at what time is it, where do I have to be, what do I have to do. And in many ways it was so nice, because you didn't feel like you were pressured by that. But on the other hand, it was a challenge, because you really did kind of rely on what was going on in the village.
Here they don't tell time by any sort of technological means at all. They kind of just follow where the sun is during the day, and when it's night, it's night. When it's day. They wake up with the sun, they go to sleep with the sun, and that's how they do it here in Elk-Gray. And for me, it's been quite challenging, because I've become very accustomed to the American way of telling time, and here I haven't had a watch at all. So I just kind of go with what they do. If they're going to bed, then I know that I have to go to bed. And if they're awake, then I know at some point in time I'm going to have to start waking up, and I can't tell at all what time it is, but I just kind of follow what they do.
You just relied on what everyone else was doing, and it was actually kind of the schedule of the village that we ran around. So when they were still playing their music at 3 a.m, we still heard it, and we were still running through that. So that was huge. But also just someone else brings the subject of privacy, and you think that you would have privacy because you're out in nature, but really you don't, for two reasons. One, they're a very open community. Once again, their houses are all structured in this circular kind of form, and so you're just connected.
See everybody else's house, or
absolutely.
They're actually connected?
They're not connected, but they're placed in circular so that you can see into each other's, and it's very common that you go and visit someone else, and you have several families sometimes living in one house, and so just by nature they're very connected. But also we were on a study abroad trip, and we were just located in this one village, and so someone talks about that, about just that process of being so unaware that we're accustomed to privacy here. You can shut your door whenever you want. You can not answer your phone and just like disconnect yourself from people. And in ways we had that because we also didn't have technology, and so there was no way we could contact back home and things like that. But within the village itself, within our the other students, we didn't have privacy, and that was really eye-opening too, is how immune we are to having that privacy here.
The Kayapo here live in a very collective community, and us being constantly around each other, we're always reminded that we don't necessarily have privacy, so we have to learn to also be more collective.
I know that for some people it was a challenge, an uncomfortable challenge initially, and I think eventually it kind of became a lesson, like some of the other processes.
Do you find yourself using that skill set even now that you're back in the States? You kind of are aware that you look at things perhaps different than what may be?
Well, I think in my case it's a little different because I was raised to be a little bit more open,
bicultural.
but still, I definitely came back and it was I don't know, it's like you develop this idea that that you don't have to be so reserved, and you are more connected with people, especially when maybe, yeah, their background isn't so similar to your own.
Yeah.
And somehow you can still make connections. And even though you know that, you may think that because that's what your values tell you. When you experience it, especially on such extreme levels, it just becomes more profound and just integrated.
And I think it takes the reflection piece to make it more profound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up our series of looking at Ali's fantastic trip up the Amazon doing service learning and encountering all 6 constructs of intercultural knowledge and competency. So until next time, this is Chuck Callahan, and we'll see you down the road.